All right, so we can call this is December, the December 3rd meeting of the Jericho Planning Commission to order. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's our first meeting after Thanksgiving, so gotten in the habit of saying thank you and some gratitude. So a couple of gratitudes before we start. SJ, very grateful that you decided to join the Planning Commission. Welcome. This is your first in-person meeting, although you've been like a mascot honorary member for a long time. But we're very glad to have you here at the table. Chris, feeling especially grateful to have you too. After the last couple of weeks, we were working offline a little bit, and I kept finishing every email and phone call thinking like, oh, very happy that he's here.
Thank you.
To provide his expertise. And lastly, very grateful to the group. I mean, I really believe that everyone comes here with the best intentions to be thoughtful and think really hard about stuff where there's no real clear right answer all the time. And I just really appreciate it. Happy to have you. Okay, so for tonight's agenda, we will have some time for public comment, approved minutes from November 19th. We are going to discuss an issue that we raised at our last meeting in new business, about how the regulations currently handle calculating density. And the issue has come up a few times, and it was raised as part of David's red line in the bylaw modernization grant, and we discussed it last week, handling it as a standalone issue, which we're going to talk about tonight. Then we wanted to be well prepared to hit 2025 hit the ground running. So Chris suggested that we review our liaison assignments and also give the SJ the opportunity to take a look at that. Then we'll have some updates from Chris and from ourselves, from each other, other business, and then wrap up for our next meeting, which will be December 17th, I believe.
Oh,
It says December 3rd.
it's the 17th.
December 17th, yeah. Okay. Does anyone need to make any changes to the agenda? Good. Okay. I will invite public comment. I should have said thank you both also very much for being here. You are definitely two of our most consistent participants, and we appreciate that. So does anybody have any comments to offer at this point?
I do appreciate that you put 5.6 on the agenda.
Oh, but you have to state your name and come
Oh.
up, same as always. Sorry.
You couldn't hear me?
I can
It's
hear
the
you,
microphone.
but the,
Where's the microphone? I don't
It's
see
in the ceiling now.
ceiling microphone.
Yes, thanks to you.
Name's Jim Carroll. I live on Boulder Hill Road in Jericho Center. I'm not just speaking for myself tonight. I've got a group of people whose lands are seriously affected by land development regulations. And 5.6, I truly believe, is in fact the Scrivener's error. I have a confirming email from the Scrivener acknowledging that all of the elements of the land development regulations, to the best of her ability, were properly adjusted in 2022. And case law is very clear. What was the intent? What did you put in front of the public? And what does it say? And using Kate's Food Truck, which is a Jericho case, where the court looked hard at the ambiguity of Jericho's land development regulations. And given the number of lawyers in Vermont that work in the subject, you can just imagine that ambiguity is a very common trait as you go through regulations. But the bottom line is that the definitions and the other parts of the land development regulations make it perfectly clear that the planning commission, which I participated in as well as many others, said we want to have 3-plexes and 4-plexes and have greater density in Jericho. One piece was not correct, 5.6. As a result of that, 3 projects that I worked on, the prospective parties that would have invested have gone other places. They're working in other towns and they will not be back, which significantly reduces the present value, alias the fair market value of those properties, because the development costs, when you amortize it over a small number of units. So the interpretation of the Jericho zoning administrator and the town attorney is contrary to what I think case law and fact is. So Jericho is also incurring significant legal fees. The town attorney has encouraged me in writing to take it to another forum, which would be Superior Court. So there's 2 significant adverse cash consequences to the town of Jericho by not timely fixing ambiguities, errors in the land development regulations. Properties are not developed. The fair market value of the property is the most conservative interpretation. It is not the speculative value as to what it might be if you didn't have this. So when there's a ruling that says you can only have 4 units on X numbers of acres, when the regulations, except for the error in 5.6, says you can only have half that, the value of the property is actually less than half, because the development costs are amortized. The core cost is greater just to initiate and permitting, because I don't get a discount at Act 250. I don't get a discount on my engineering. So all my costs, for the most part, to adhere to all the complex regulations in Vermont is not associated with density as much as it is stormwater and all these other things. So we will be appealing property taxes assessments in April in Jericho. So for the next fiscal year, the town can either accept the fact that these regulations do not allow that which we thought was an improvement in 2022. That's
Okay, Jim, I'm gonna stop you there. Just because it's been now 4 minutes, and we are going to discuss that issue in more detail. So it's helpful background, but we'll also come back to it.
okay. That's fine. But the bottom line is, I don't see the planning commission hear from the public recognizing the time value of money, the impact on the grand list, or the discrimination against certain property owners. Most of the people that own these properties are elderly. And so the fixed income impact of paying the taxes and not having revenue and income is personally significant. So rolling forward as a planning commission and not fixing items that are known to be wrong on a timely, regular basis and going for these global changes is a material error, because you also subject yourself, because you put other stuff in, those things get appealed, or they actually get turned down by the voters, as you're very familiar with. So this has been over a year that we brought the issue that you're discussing tonight to you. And I can prove to a court that in fact it is a Scrivener's error. The Scrivener has put in writing to me that they did everything that they thought they should do to make sure that you could have triplexes and fourplexes in Jericho. So
Okay.
it's significant.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public, either online or here in the room? Okay. Moving on to approving the minutes of November 19th. Someone like to make a motion?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Wendy, thank you. Anyone make a second?
Second.
Chris? Okay, any discussion or edits or corrections needed for the minutes? Okay, ready to vote to approve? All those in favor of approving the minutes for November 19th, say aye. Aye.
Hi.
Okay, and SJ's abstained. Right, everyone else said aye and Eric is absent. Okay, thank you. All right, so now moving on to item number 5, which is to talk about the issue that Jim was just mentioning, which is section 5.6 of the regulations, which describes how density is calculated. And for this, I am going to pass it over to Chris.
Great. So if you can go back to the previous slide, which is the timeline slide. Great. So at the last meeting on the 19th, I'd said, I really didn't have capacity to take this on, but I would look at what our options were to moving forward to try to address this as quickly as possible. So I had talking to SJ, and she had offered to step up and kind of lead the work on this. So I'm really excited to be working on this with SJ. And Susan's also stepped up to work on this. So we have a small group of us that are going to be leading this effort. So we are the project team. We are hoping that we can look at just resolving what seems to be a discrepancy between the 5.6 density definition and then the use table where uses are allowed in certain districts. So that is what we're going to be talking about. So tonight we're just going to frame what the issue is to make sure everyone understands what that is. And we've got some questions, and hopefully by February we may be getting this in front of the select board for their chance to take a look at it. We will see how the timeline goes. If we can move that quickly, hopefully we will be able to.
So this timeline is for the 5.6 issue.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So I said that SJ had offered to lead it, so I am very happy to turn it over to SJ, who's going to talk us through the next couple of slides.
Yeah, so I think we all this conversation has been happening in lots of different rooms, different places, different meetings. And so we could go back. No, you can look like, sorry. And the last meeting that you all had, I really regret that I wasn't able to be here. You had a really substantive conversation about 5.6 density and talked about a lot of the issues. And I think what we really wanted to do was to make sure that this project rollout was, and the discussion was an actual agenda item, so that public could be warned and could attend. And so for tonight's discussion, I think some of this is going to be review, especially in light of your last meeting. So the goals really are to confirm that y'all want to move forward with the timeline and the project team that Chris outlined. Want to make sure that we all have a high level understanding of the issue and that it's on public record clearly. And then really building up the conversation from the last meeting, what questions or concerns does the planning commission have that the project team can include in our kind of ongoing research and analysis so that we can bring answers to those questions, concerns back to you at the next meeting. Next slide, please. So this is some background, but really the goal of the proposed change is to calculate residential densities in a way that is consistent with residential uses in each zone. So in a zone where triplexes are allowed, the density calculation shouldn't be the thing that prohibits triplexes from being built. We know that our town plan prioritizes enabling more housing choice. The housing resolution specifically calls out multi-household dwellings. And the Housing Committee's recent report recommended updating density, specifically the 5.6 density calculation. The select board discussed that and was in favor of looking into it. And the reason that we are prioritizing multi-household dwellings is because they're more affordable, right? However, because our current density calculation requires more land than the minimum lot area to build a triplex or a fourplex, it increases the cost per unit of what otherwise would be a more affordable option. So if you could go to the next slide. We have regulations that kind of define by zone what we can build, how big a lot is, et cetera. So our table of uses defines what residential uses or dwelling types are allowed in each zone. So whether a duplex and a single household is permitted everywhere, but whether a triplex or a fourplex is allowed in the zone. Our dimensional standards define things like minimum lot size by zone, so those are listed up there as well. And dimensional standards also cover things like maximum lot coverage, building height, things like that. So there are other limiting factors, including like natural resources or infrastructure, which we're all talking about. If you don't have enough soils to support a triplex, then you're not going to build it regardless of what zone you're in, right? But the proposed change to density calculation doesn't impact or supersede any of these existing regulations. So the change in density calculation doesn't now all of a sudden make a fourplex buildable in a forestry lot. What it does is makes a fourplex buildable on a minimum lot in the village district. So let's take the village district as an example. So in the village district, the minimum lot is 1 acre and the allowed uses or residential dwelling types are single household all the way up to fourplex. Next slide, please. When you apply the density calculation, the allowed density per minimum lot is only 2 units. So when you take the density calculation into account, you can build a single household dwelling on 1 acre, the minimum lot in a village district. You can build a duplex, but even though you're allowed via the uses table to build a triplex or a fourplex, you can't because that's more than 2 units. So you can build a duplex, you can't build a triplex or a fourplex. In a sense, the density calculation is prohibiting what the table of uses allows. Did I miss anything?
SJ, can I
Yeah.
ask you to go back just for 1 sec? I'm sorry, I'm not feeling totally well. And so
Go
I
back
was following you. I was following you until I wasn't. And this seems so important to understand. This
Yeah.
the density, so the allowed density is on this first table?
No, these
Okay.
are all the other things that tell you what you can build, where you can build it, how big
Right.
it can. Yeah,
This is the allowed use. The terminology is that these are the allowed uses.
Right.
So,
Okay, and so then how did you go from here to the next slide, which then says that based on the, where is the data that says, or the reg that says what the density can withhold or allow?
that's not on this slide. Yeah, the next slide. And we didn't include the actual language here. But what you see down in that bottom left corner, baseline density for all residential uses is determined by 2 units for each minimum lot.
Got it. So that applies throughout.
Correct.
Thank you. That's what I missed. Okay,
And
thank you. Sorry about
that's
that.
where the discrepancy is. So it's 2 units throughout, even though by the table of uses, you would expect that it would be 4 units where a fourplex is allowed, or 3 units where a threeplex is allowed.
Thank you. Thank you for slowing it down so I could catch up.
No, it's important.
okay. So back to you, Bob. Right. Pitch perfect. So we have existing language, which Heidi, that's the text of section 5.6, which describes this conventional density calculation, meaning like, most of the time, this is how it works. And so the effect of it is what I was kind of describing the last time, that if you wanted to build 3 or 4 acres in say that district, you would need 3 acres. I mean, a triplex or a quad, you would need 3 acres or 4 acres. So it basically is penalizing those dwelling types, even though the use table is saying those dwelling types are allowed. So we would like to edit the text of 5.6 and present back to the planning commission in the form of a red line. And our goal is to have the edit be as clear and unambiguous as possible, and as simple as possible, and as small as possible, so that unintended consequences that we don't unleash other issues. And so that's one reason actually why we weren't going into the text right now, is because we weren't really quite ready. What we wanted to get more was an understanding of what should we consider, what should we be worried about, what should we avoid? Does this even make sense? Or does this seem at odds? Like when you look at it and like the minimum, the use type that's allowed does not sort of match up, or I think of it as synchronize with how the density calculation works. And that seems like something that should be changed.
So you're presuming that we need to keep 5.6.
For now, in order to pursue this expedited situation, because to eliminate 5.6 or to really change 5.6, I think takes us into a lot of other ancillary considerations, because there's a lot of, it's like the dominoes, there's a lot of other things that hinge on how density gets calculated. So yes, that's my presumption, is that we edit 5.6. However, and I said this to Craig, I personally would like to revisit it in another iteration, because I'm not sure it's serving us well overall. But I would be, waking up at 2 a.m. going, what did we miss to really change it or the other thing?
Okay, so what are we discussing right now? The proposed changes?
Not really proposed change, sort of the proposed idea that we would edit the text, that you delegate the 3 of us to work on it, that we are going to pursue an expedited schedule that brings us back to a red line to you at the next meeting, and then we pursue getting it adopted, which the law requires all of these notices and all of these hearings and all of these dates. And so what Chris worked out is that if we love it at our next meeting and we're ready to say, yes, this is the change, the soonest it could be adopted is something like mid-February.
Based on all of the notification requirements.
Can we go back to the table with the district, that one right there? So what are you, this to me is sort of the crux of the issue, but what are you thinking the proposed change would be?
So what SJ was describing, which is that instead of the calculation being based on either a single family or a duplex, which I think kind of comes from previous iterations before this table was updated, that instead the calculations references the table and basically says that the dwelling type that is allowed in the district is allowed on the minimum lot size.
So we're not necessarily proposing changes in the table of uses, right?
Correct.
So this stays intact. What changes is the wording for 5.6.
Correct. Because 5.6 drives how many acres you need to have to build these types. And it sort of, like exacerbates it.
Would it be too complicated to change this table at this time? Because I feel like the table itself needs to be, or should, in my opinion, the table itself should be updated.
So David had some changes considered in his red line. So yes, we can consider changes to this table as part of our work with David.
But
I
change,
think,
oh, I was gonna say, changing the table doesn't address the underlying
No, I know,
density question.
but the underlying, addressing the short-term underlying density question doesn't also at the same time do as much as it could if this was updated.
I think
Again, in my
I struggle with that too, Chris, because I want to change the table, but I keep going back to the concept of small incremental changes to get something that has a big impact passed sooner. And I see the wisdom of attaching that the conversation to the other work that we're doing. So we're taking parallel track.
No, that's fine. I just, to me, it's important that this be addressed in a timely manner also. Because I just I don't think that, again, in my opinion, that table is out of date.
Can you say a little more about that in terms of density?
Well, I'm not, in my opinion, I think that a triplex and a fourplex, I'm not convinced that they should be treated any differently than a single family house. And so wherever we, permit a single family house, I think we should permit those as well.
Okay. And yeah, and we have talked about that before.
Well, we've talked about it. I don't know that we ever got to the point of
We
actually
have not.
moving ahead with that.
No.
right. We talked about it kind of with him, and then we talked about it a little bit on our own. And to me, it's somewhat remains to be debated among us and then also with David as part of the bylaw modernization grant package. And so because of that, that was one reason why I was hesitant to pull them apart. Because all these pieces work together, like density has a big impact on subdivision. And subdivision has a big impact on PUD. So we have to be careful that we think it all the way through. So I want to be thorough and careful without getting too bogged down. So that's why I'm saying, like, if we want to expedite, I think we have to leave the table the way it is for now.
Okay, and the table may or may not be addressed in the BMG.
Yeah, I think it's kind of up to us. I think, however, I don't know if you remember Chris Flynn's advice was to really keep David's package of changes focused on village and village center oriented changes. However, David had included some very common sense housing friendly changes. And so I think we just have to think through how that's communicated to the public. If that package of changes includes more than just village center based changes. This density changes was one of the most significant. The one we're talking about right now. Heidi. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you very much. And I think you just answered the question, but just again, in terms of being super clear about what we're doing, if we change the work that, thank you very much. Let me first say that SJ, Susan, and Chris, you said that you would be happy to fast track to look at density. Does that would apply beyond the scope of just the 3 centers? It would apply, the work that you would be doing is thinking about it across the entire town, right? And I'm seeing SJ nod her head. So that's what I understood, but I just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
Well, no, I think that that's not an assumption. I think it's something that we should make sure we're all on the same page.
Okay,
About.
let me say,
So
I would
thank
love
you
it
for
to be
saying that.
all on the same page because I think that one of the unintended consequence pieces that was raised at a previous meeting, I think it was you, Sabina, sort of the worrying about like if we didn't look at how it would impact in other areas and we made a change, it could have a ripple effect that we didn't intend. And now I'm speaking for you, so you should speak for yourself.
Yes, I still think that we need to get, more data, more information about any possible unintended consequences in the districts like the forestry and rural ag, based on their definitions, their use definitions, so that we make sure we're staying true to those. I am also, as part of our bigger discussions, I would like to hear from somebody who's doing conservation planning and make sure and help us just see the bigger picture and make sure that we are not, you know, trading one thing for a problem that we didn't think would be there. So again, my point of view is just that we don't have all the information that we need yet to make a sound decision. And I would like to continue to pursue that information so that we can all think about it together.
And when you say to make us all the information to make a sound decision, you're thinking about changes to this use table.
If we're gonna discuss changing the use table.
Right, okay,
Then I wanna have the background information
Right,
to be
right.
able to say X will not impact things
Right.
in a negative way, or X will impact things in a negative way. And we still might decide to do it, but we're
Right.
not there yet.
okay, but you're not saying that necessarily about this density
No, I
calculation
think
text.
the text, changing the text the way you described makes sense right now,
Mhm.
right? You're saying separate them out.
Yes,
And I mean, are we also saying then that even this change in the text could have unintended consequences? Or is that, I think what I heard you saying is that you're trying to really minimize that.
yeah,
And,
I mean, that's the homework that we've
Yeah.
signed up to do
Right.
over the next 2 weeks.
right, and that sounds reasonable to me.
Right.
Yeah, so for example, like one of the questions I have, I don't think this is gonna be a big impact, but I want to understand what the impact is. Is if we make a change, as we're talking about it, what are the implications of that in terms of calculating the 50% PUD bonus density? I think it'll just mean more housing, which I think is what we want. But there may be some things that come up as part of that assessment that we weren't thinking of. There may be nothing, but I just want to make sure there's
I
nothing.
mean, I did a real rudimentary, like, control F, typed in the word density and found a bunch of different things that I hadn't considered before, aren't negatively impacted by it. It was like, oh, yeah, okay. Or all of the places, again, a control F for 5.6. So all of the places in the regs that point to 5.6 to understand, okay, well, where are all of the places that are impacted by this change? Not only is the language that we're playing with gonna work in all of those places, but are there some unintended consequences that we don't see because we didn't realize that it was being pointed to by some other section?
So I think when we're asking, are there some things we should be thinking about? Like, those are the types of things I know that we have flagged. We've got a brain trust here. We wanted to make sure there wasn't something else that we needed to be flagging.
Right, when you think about the concept. of density in units per half acre, quarter acre, acre, 10 acres.
I mean, I guess I feel like we're at a different place as a town than we have been historically. And whereas we have previously tried very carefully to limit density and limit growth and control development. I think now we realize we're at the point where we need more density. And so I think it's a sort of a communal mental shift that we will all be doing collectively. I also think that in much of Jericho, wastewater and septic will continue to be a driving force for a lot of density development. So I think it's worth bearing that in mind. But I think if we really do want affordable housing, we really need to make some changes. And so. It's a good move.
Like the narrowing of the scope of this, like when you ask for like, what are the other considerations, like. I had other considerations, but they are out of scope. So I can't, without digging into the existing regs, which you all have generously offered to do. I can't think of other like things that we need to discuss.
Okay. Are you sure they're out of scope?
Yeah.
Because they might be helpful.
I started going off about Act 250 changes and, and
Right.
if that felt like that was out of scope. Like trying to understand what was coming down the road. But because it's contained and we're not changing the table of uses at this time. I think it's more about making sure, like seeing what else points to 5.6. I think that is very prudent to do.
And I appreciate Chris's suggestion of like, let's take some example cases and calculate 50% density bonus and like make an imaginary and see, is there an unintended consequence or does this snowball in a way that we don't think it will, but let's do the math.
Okay.
And that's gonna, I mean, we're talking about words and how we change the words. I mean, words have funny ways of being interpreted, right? So we need to make sure that the wording is what we want the wording to be.
Right, show it to, completely objective, innocent bystander who has no idea. And
So this is kind of my
how
next
to
question. Is part of it, it's new member and I don't know how these things work. But between now and when we come back to you and present something, obviously we want to run it past the CCRPC. I want to be able to, well, I personally want to be able to bring it to the housing committee who has spent a lot of time thinking about this and recommending this. And I'd like to be able to bring them a draft of a red line and say, does this do what I think we all think it should do, and get some feedback there. The two questions I have about that are, one, is that something that is like, how does that work with you all and red lines and getting feedback like that? Is that an option, and how do I go about doing that appropriately? And then also, and this may be more like town hall nerd question that isn't relevant for this room, but the housing committee is ad hoc at the moment and leadership is shared amongst all of us. I don't know that we would be needing to call a meeting between now and the next time the planning commission meets. So can I send it to committee members and have them provide us individual feedback as individual members of the committee, or does that break open? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Well, to that point, I was gonna ask if, in the interest of making this as expedient as possible, if you could give us a preview, then we could if there were substantial, or if there were any suggestions or changes, we could do that before the next meeting, so we might be more ready to move ahead.
Yeah,
There's a way we can do that. I mean, we
Yeah.
have to be careful
Have
to
a work
avoid
done,
open
but-
meeting rules.
right.
Like everyone can't be working on the same document and seeing everyone else's changes. But there's a way we can vet it.
Heidi,
Yeah, thank you. I also had a process question. I was thinking about this conversation about the way that it's worded matters and how it's therefore interpreted. And I'm thinking the folks who would be the interpreters are neighbors and colleagues who
So,
Heidi, you froze on your internet.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. You're back, sort of.
we lost you at friends and neighbors, I think.
sorry. Oh, I see. I have an unstable connection. Can you hear me though?
Yeah,
Okay. I was thinking the friends and neighbors on the development review board and zoning administrator are the ones who are going to have to be able to interpret our meaning. And so is it possible to get their review before we to make sure that the way we're saying it and they are hearing it is as intended before we finalize?
yeah, I don't think there's an issue in terms of the little working group, like shopping it around and getting input from other town
Well, and we
staff
also have
and
folks in the room who are
Yeah.
actively trying to do these things that may be.
Yeah.
yeah, that's part of information gathering.
And also just in like process wise, so we would bring a red line to our next meeting that theoretically has had input from lots of people in the interim. And we would warn the hearing if we're ready, based on that red line. But the purpose of the hearing is to hear input. So we have a hearing, we hear input, which can include input from us and from other people in the interim because it's been published. We can then make changes to that red line before forwarding it to the select board. And generally, you know, if they're not like huge changes, we wouldn't be required to have another hearing. So we still would have time to work on it and improve it and respond to input that we receive during that time. Okay, maybe this would be a good time to hear from members of the public. So Chuck, you had your hand up, please share. Briefly,
Jericho Center. In 1965, the planning commission really got going. And they identified the three major problems in Jericho. One was mobile homes, one was cheap housing, and one was small lots. And they were successful in solving those problems, and we are still solving those problems. When I look at 5.6, the easiest thing to do and the smartest thing to do is just to get rid of it. It serves no purpose. And I want you to think of it as one of a dozen major zoning laws which we passed, which are designed to benefit the wealthy and designed to exclude low and middle income people for our own aesthetic and social, preferences and, and benefit. When I hear you talk about unintended consequences, let's talk about the unintended consequences of 2 generations of zoning designed to benefit the wealthy. What are the consequences? The median age person in Jericho is 30% older than the median age person in Bolton, which has multifamily housing, which has small lots, which allows people to build starter homes. We're 30% older than Colchester, 30% older than South Burlington. We have extraordinary unintended consequences due to these zoning laws designed to benefit the wealthy. And we are seeing the unintended, or maybe the intended, consequences of that. So And I've watched you guys closely for 5 years, really closely for the last 3. You are terrified of any unintended consequences that might benefit a low and middle income person. And have no problem putting, leaving a zoning and a housing policy designed to benefit the wealthy. You have no problem leaving in that, really wanting to leave that in place. And terrified of the possibility of making a mistake. This thing is really easy, 5.6, you just get rid of it. And I hope that's kind of the conclusion you're there. But at this pace, this will be the first thing Jericho has done in 3 years. The first tangible thing in 3 years of your self-declared housing crisis to do anything which has the potential for adding a single unit of affordable housing. We've been in this crisis and we're so concerned about the unintended consequences that we just simply are just like paralyzed. So just get over the unintended consequences, peace. Look at stuff. You do not need David to look at this. Chris has got a good handle on it. I mean, just look at it and make the obvious changes. And if there are unintended consequences, pick up on them and maybe change them. But let's have an unintended consequence that favors a middle or low income person instead of really just leaving zoning to benefit the wealthy as sort of the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
It's not very often that I think that I can actually add something to something that Mr. Lacy said. He did focus on wealthiness and he left a couple other discriminators out, like race and religion, that Jericho has been, and it's documented, and you can ask Chuck. It's not just wealth, it's the color of the skin, the religion that's practiced, as well as the socioeconomic status. Basically, let's all have people who look like us. And what this has done is that we're now facing double-digit property tax increases because of the way the algorithm for allocating state funds adversely affects a town like Jericho, which has a high revenue and a very undiverse. And you have the town select board, the people that we elected, saying by resolution, we're going to do this and we're going to be diverse. And you have the former person who occupied Chris's chair saying, we thought we caught everything in 2022. This is, in fact, whichever way you choose to interpret the law, is correcting an error from 2022. I sat through all those meetings. So unless one of you people feels that you intended to change that table that's now disappeared and smoke the citizens with an apparent forward move while you left the latent defect that's now interpreted by at least 2 people in the town as preventing the table of uses from actually being employed. So you guys sat there in 2022. I'm not stupid. I've been here for 47 years. I've practiced in this area for over 5 decades. And I thought we had finally fixed a small portion of the racist socioeconomic discrimination that's been abundant in the town of Jericho for the whole length of time that I've been here. That's almost 5 decades. And then I find out after we commit capital, after we start moving forward, gotcha. 5.6 doesn't match definitions or the table of uses. Well, that's fine, because case law says, what was the intent? So I say to all of you, what was the intent in 2022? The Scrivener, the person who wrote it, Catherine Sonic, said it was a mistake. We missed it. So you have 2 paths. I appreciate the work that Chris has done and the direction that you're going in. But you can say, huh, Jim's right. It is a Scrivener's error. And that's SCREVNOR. And that's very clear in case law. You fix it. If Catherine was here, she could say that. Chris is here. So one of your options is not to go all the way through February, but to say, yeah, in 2022, we intended to add conditional uses to all but the forestry and the 10-acre zone of triplex and fourplexes, and in all the other zones, they would be permitted uses. And 5.6 says, no, can't do that. It's an error, or it was a deliberate deception of all of us who worked on it and all of us who voted for it. Those are the two choices. There's no unintended consequences other than, oops, we missed it. Unless somebody put their finger on the scale and deliberately kept it there so that the rest of us who trusted and believed that this was being done. And the Affordable Housing Committee, I mean, I really wanted to go a lot farther, because the unintended consequences are out of control property taxes, people who need to do the work that we need done to sustain our community cannot live here. My children are all professional and they can't afford to build on land that I can give them. That's pretty significant. And at 76, I don't have the patience left to wait for slow delays. So we're not waiting. We are moving forward, and I hope that you will consider that there is a path that doesn't wait for February. If you guys believe, as I do, that the public discussions were that this was going to allow that table of uses to be the functional law in Jericho, and that 5.6 is nothing different than, oops, I forgot that. Oops, I didn't understand that. Because if you think that this is reasonably polished, I've already put it in front of a judge. And he's just told me I got to bring it back with a fuller package. So it's like, come on, guys, let's get this done.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments? So we're good with the team. Good with coming back to it on 12/17. Okay. And my concern that we'll be managing to is trying not to take away too much time from our other work and keep going on that. So Chris and I are meeting with David tomorrow, not about this, but about his grant work and where we are with the red lines and where we are with our comments and our feedback to him. Okay. Are we good, Chris, do you think?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right, so we can move on to the next topic. So this chart here, everyone provided Chris, I think, with their most current understanding of what their current assignments are. Sarah left, we had done some horse trading before that, now Eric's not here. So we wanted to see if anybody wanted to move things around or make other volunteer offers. We haven't generally had a planning commission person liaison with either the Board of Abatement or the Board of Civil Authority. The Food Hub Task Force is relatively new, and I don't know, Wendy, were you interacting with them for a while or not really?
A little bit, I was going to meetings for a little bit, but I kind of know.
And
Not that they didn't fall off.
right, and do you think though that that would be helpful for the planning commission to attend to, or we don't?
Maybe not every meeting, but certainly like they're actually gaining some momentum. They're joining with Underhill. And I track on notes and stuff, so I still get their email. And I think they're really working, they're really becoming a pretty functional and effective task force. And Sabine, I know you followed them a little bit. I don't know whether you feel like we need an official liaison or whether it's more like occasionally checking in with their chair.
I think that's reasonable.
Well, I think maybe that's an important point, like, my expectation is not that someone who's a liaison goes to every meeting or has to, you know, be a part of the committee or anything, it's just more like eyes and ears, and if we had a project where we wanted to interact with them, we would have a relationship that we could tap into. Or if we wanted to request feedback, or like you're saying, if we just wanted to sort of pay attention once in a while, read their minutes and just sort of keep track of what they're doing. I have, I guess, you know, a pretty modest expectation.
If that's the
As a
expectation,
liaison.
then I can fulfill that role for that group, because I already read their email.
Yeah, and then like if we wanted to, like if we do anything related to like on farm, dwelling on farm housing, like that kind of, that would be a good group to kind of connect with, because they are developing relationships with the farming community,
Yes.
for example. Okay, so can we put your name in there then?
Sure.
I'll just also add, like, we don't know what's gonna come up. Like, we don't have a representative for the MOPS committee, and there might not be much that ever comes up, but the town garage just came up, and it would be great if we knew we had someone who at least had a relationship with them.
I'd be
They might
happy to
want
do
to check
that.
in for that.
I
Yeah.
know some of those guys anyway and help with their trail days. I'm not sure how actively organized they are, but they're, you know, they organize for 2 annual, or you know, every 6 months they do a trail day. And so, I can reach out to them.
Okay, so Chris, you'll do the MOBS committee,
Yeah,
and then the Tri-Town Transportation Committee.
I reached out to Wayne Howe about that, and from what I've learned, it no longer really exists.
That's my understanding.
They
There's
have
not.
lost, there's not a critical mass of people.
So I pulled this list from the town's website. So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
that's where it came from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, this is backtracking when we were talking about mobs and an organization that I don't see listed up there that maybe we should, it's Jericho Underhill Land Trust.
That's not a town.
It's not, but it doesn't impact. I mean, they have,
Well, I'm
It's not a
on
town.
that board, so I can be that,
yeah,
you know,
Critical
eyes and
link,
ears.
yeah, eyes and ears.
For Michael.
Hi.
The Heidi,
I moved, so hopefully I have a better visibility here. I was also going to say, if we're looking for people to take spots, if Chris Brown, if you, I was also going to volunteer for mobs just because I'm here and I would be happy to. But if you want to take that, I was also going to offer if we think it would be helpful to have somebody at the Food Hub Task Force, just because it's something different and new. If we feel like that would be useful, I'd be glad to be the point person there.
fine with me too.
that's fine with you too?
Yeah.
You sure?
Absolutely. I
Okay,
will still read their email, but that is fine.
all right, so Heidi, sure, that would be great. What about the DRB? Because I think Sarah was the liaison to the DRB, which meant since they're quasi-judicial, the interaction actually has to be very kind of non-existent or sort of controlled. So she would just attend their meetings once in a while, I think always on Zoom, sometimes even on the TV anonymously, and then sometimes gave us a heads up like, oh, at this hearing, they just discussed XYZ, or we could sort of see how the regulations are implemented and interpreted. All those meetings are recorded, so it doesn't even have to be live, and all those meetings have packets of material where Chris Flynn produces a report on every application. There's written decisions. So it's a little bit more technical, less about the relationship and more about really like real-time study of our work in practice or our predecessor's work in practice. Anybody game for that? We could say, give it to Eric since he's not here. Unless anybody really would be interested to do it.
I do think it's really important. I think seeing those meetings is really helpful in understanding how these folks get used. I don't have the bandwidth for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I
it's a little
agree.
daunting.
It is. Is it something that is? Could it be rotated on a monthly basis?
Yeah, they also don't
They
meet
don't meet
very
all the
often.
Yeah,
But sometimes they don't have any applications for 2 months at a time.
yeah. Like, so if it's scheduled out,
Mhm.
then I can see I could do it. I too don't have the bandwidth to do it consistently. Because
Yeah.
it does take a lot more
Yeah.
habits.
It probably would be good for everyone to see how that works if you haven't attended those meetings.
Right. Yeah, that's a good idea. All right, so why don't we say that for now, Eric and I will rotate it. And then we'll take that for a few months. And then see if somebody else wants to step in and do it, okay?
Right,
Yep.
open the can of worms that you all are gonna wait for.
Is it about the topic of liaisons? Yes?
I know we don't have a wastewater task force yet.
But we should.
But should we, in preparation for the possibility of that, maybe have someone whose job it is to just kind of keep on?
Keep an eye on that project.
Yeah.
You have a
How
deadline,
would that
the
differ?
planning commission has a deadline on wastewater for the end of this month.
What I read is that there was a general, I don't know if it was maybe statewide consensus that the towns that were most successful in moving ahead with the wastewater project had a wastewater committee that consisted of a planning commission member, somebody from the select board ideally, and community members. And that, which kept the momentum going and helped to develop community-wide support for the project
Mhm.
and community-wide buy-in. So I think it would be a good idea to think seriously about that.
So I think maybe Chris and I should talk to Paula about it.
Yeah.
And see what they're thinking, where they are with it. The town did post a position for a public works coordinator. I don't know if you guys saw that. That's pretty recent. I don't think they've started to interview yet, and I think they're hoping that person is going to be part of that committee or leading that committee, or not really sure.
But this wouldn't necessarily, or shouldn't be seen as stepping on someone's toes or
Yeah,
taking, not, an assumption that someone else can't do the job,
right.
but more as a way of collectively making sure this just keeps going.
Yeah, supporting.
Supporting
Yes,
and
yeah.
enhancing the project.
Yep,
Um,
okay. All right, anything else on liaisons?
Well, do we want to broach the idea of liaison with other local towns?
Chris has basically
Hmm.
liaison with the CCRPC and done a lot of outreach and formed a lot of relationships with some of our neighboring towns as part of his
Okay.
self-directed orientation job, is my understanding.
Yeah, and the town planners meet monthly
Okay,
at CC. There's a planners advisory group or something like that that
Yeah.
I'm part of.
I'm thinking mostly of Underhill, of course, because we share so many potential.
Yeah, it's on our radar to talk to them a little bit about our by our project,
Yeah.
our bylaw modernization
Okay.
grant project.
Okay.
Yeah, they don't have a town planner now, but they do have a planning commission, so.
Mhm.
With the Underhill Planning Commission, no, yeah.
I feel like we talked about it.
Yeah.
I think that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I
because
think I
feel
thought we did.
not.
I don't know that we ever did it, but.
Mhm.
I remember, I can't remember if it was the town administrator or who it was that came and read a letter, I think to the select board saying,
Yes,
we'd like to be included.
yes, and it was already,
Discussions that
it was on our radar already
Yeah.
before that, but yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Okay, anything else on liaisons? Hey, did you have anything else on liaisons?
No, I just think it'll be good to have a name in every box, even if we don't necessarily interact with the Board of Abatement. Who knows, something might come up. I don't know.
We didn't talk about the cemetery.
Oh, a name in every box.
Yeah, did we don't, did we? I don't think that's,
We didn't, no, we
happened
haven't,
before.
no.
I don't think. Maybe that's just topical, if we ever need.
It's a-
No.
It's a potential civic space.
Well, it is, and we've had
Yeah.
talk about green burials and changing regs to allow for green burials, so I think it's, it comes up topically rather than,
As
An
well.
ongoing.
It's
Yeah.
part of the city's open space
yeah.
network.
Well, maybe the next.
So your sense is that we should have somebody?
Yeah, I mean, who knows what it could be. I mean, historically cemeteries were treated as parks, so.
So Sabina, you're trying to do it?
I will though, honestly.
You will?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's funny. It took me a minute, but I got it.
Okay,
If you want a name in a box, you can put me in for DCN, but I don't know how that would.
I'm writing it down. Yeah, I am. So Board of Civil Authority is SJ? Those are all the, yeah. Do you know what it is, SJ?
Yeah.
It's
The justice of the peace and justices of the peace and elections.
Elections.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Jim, your hand is up. Is your comment about liaisons?
It is absolutely, Susan, and if you'll remember that the authorization at the state level for the planning commission includes doing budgeting. And when you talk about public works directors and you talk about wastewater and you talk about all these other things, the planning commission can choose to exercise its statutory authority, because as Susan pointed out to me several years ago, it says may, it doesn't say shall. And all of the failures that I look at over the past 5 decades is the lack of integration of these things. One person does this, and another person does that, and the pieces don't come together. And so you end up with large economic expenditures that don't necessarily fit in with the town plan. We've been through a monumental change in the status of life function and life quality in our world with HDMI and working from home through the internet and all of these other things. So people, when we talk about density, when we talk about wastewater, we talk about all these things, the reality is none of us are living the same way we were 2 years prior to COVID. But because COVID said you have to stay home and you can't work, obviously people worked, and that pushed Zooms and Teams and all of these other things. And I don't feel that spark in Jericho that recognizes our society has changed the way we live and the way we function. And if we don't have that organizational structure and the budgeting structure tied directly to the planning commission, which is futuristic, thinking about how things should be and how they should be regulated to that consistency, I think you miss a tremendous boat. And so you go hire someone, but the job description doesn't match what the planning commission is thinking that should be there. And I've watched this happen for years, but the towns that are really doing stuff, they're fully integrated. They're all dovetailed. And people have, and they don't have to go to meetings. They are part of a continuous consciousness exploiting technology. Because the information that's necessary, because you've got a leader that's saying, this is the direction we're going. And this is where we're going to apply our resources, and this is where, and I think you guys really are the alter ego of that leader. And I think Sarah did a great job with her announcement of the 5-member select board. We need more bodies in that position. So I think going back to that consistent difference of opinion that you want to have, I think it should say shall, Susan. And even though it says may, that means that the planning commission can have input to the budgeting process in Jericho, because there is no long range budgeting process in Jericho. It's an expense book plus a factor. So getting to where we want to get to, particularly when we start talking about 12 million, 14 million, $20 million projects, that people have no comprehension as to how we're going to get there, how we're going to pay for it. And all the towns that don't do what I'm talking about end up putting all this energy into these projects, and then they get turned down by the voters because they weren't part of the fabric of the governance of the community. And budgeting is where it's going to be. And things are going to be much worse in the future with inflation and interest rates. And if you guys look at the budget and you look at the job descriptions, and you look at the organizational structure, I think you'll be far more successful.
Okay, thank you. All right, anything else on liaisons? All right, other business. Do you have other business?
I don't know about the business, but we're doing reports, right?
Oh, sorry. Yes, we're doing reports. Thank you, Sabina.
No problem.
Let's hear some reports.
Town planners.
Oh, okay, so, Susan already mentioned it, but she and I are meeting with David tomorrow. I read the room after the last meeting. I really want to wrap up the BMG grant as quickly as possible. I know you guys have been working on it for a year. So I want to we're going to have a conversation about how we can as quickly move through that as possible to wrap that up. We've talked about a couple things tonight that I really want us to be working on. And I need to free up some capacity. So anyway, we're going to figure out how to wrap up the BMG grant as soon as possible. Also, I mentioned this a couple of meetings ago, but CCRPC is going to be rolling out an initiative to look at Act 181 and its impacts on updating the future land use map for the region. They will be coming and presenting to the Planning Commission at the January 21st. Did I get that meeting right? The January 21st meeting to talk about that. I attended a Conservation Commission meeting where they've done some work that are going to help feed into that. So there are opportunities for us to work with their other committees because they're all going to kind of help potentially feed into the future land use map update for the region. So that's what I've got.
Sabina, you look like you've got something.
I am currently working on a grant for the Conservation Commission to apply to receive shade trees for the town in several locations. So I'm busy doing that, and the Vermont Energy, the VCAN, can't think of all the acronym fully, but it's the energy group to the state, is having 3 lunchtime webinars this week. So I'm going to try to attend those. Mostly about like climate resilience and energy use and how we're gonna maintain our current trajectory with federal changes that are coming,
Mhm.
so. I'm gonna try to get to a couple of,
Mhm.
that's it.
Can I backtrack, because that just reminded me, I don't think we had our energy task force as a liaison.
No,
I thought we did.
Oh, that was that
I'm
on the
it.
table? Okay,
I think I'm on it.
okay.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. Anybody else?
Did Eric give you an update on the housing committee?
Not at our last meeting.
Do you want an update on the
Sure.
So I think I alluded to this earlier, we are kind of meeting and working in an ad hoc fashion. I've stepped down from chairing the committee. And so we've kind of delegated the work amongst ourselves. We are currently committed to still producing a yearly housing report, which we committed to as part of the housing resolution. As part of that, I think we had talked about at our last meeting, trying to put, we called it a housing convening because it sounds important, but really, again, trying to get at least a yearly meeting of the housing committee, the planning commission, maybe a member or two from the school board, the select board, getting a group meeting together. Whether it makes sense to all kind of use the housing report as an organizing structure for us to meet and talk about where we're at with the goals of that. I don't know, but so that's an idea that was bounced around. And then we've committed to, continuing to monitor progress on kind of the housing and infrastructure fronts. And providing feedback to DRB applicants on, their potential to create missing middle housing, and also advise them on any potentially exclusionary bylaws in their HOAs or in their bylaws. And other than that, we've kind of divvied those tasks out amongst us, and our next meeting will be in February, where I think we'll have another conversation about what our future looks like if we stay in this formation for a little while longer, or if we get some fresh blood and some new energy, take us someplace else. So that's where we're at.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Mhm.
Sure.
So I'm curious, like, when, my ears kind of perked up when you said, and I don't know what guidance advice on, applicants on HOA
Yeah,
exclusionary policies, how does that operationalize? Like, what does that look like?
So. I don't want to go back too far. So essentially, applicants are encouraged to go to town committees, like the Conservation Commission has a great kind of assessment, and get a letter of either support or a letter just kind of saying that the committee kind of looked over their application, et cetera. And so what we've been trying to do is take a look at that and kind of put a formula together of just quickly looking at the application, seeing where there are opportunities where maybe they could consider some things that anyone could consider, like having a septic tank that can in the future allow for an ADU or something like that, including some of those recommendations in there. And then again, if they're at the stage where they have language for bylaws, if there are exclusionary things, pointing that out to them and potentially making them aware that that might jeopardize the town taking over a private road, for instance. But really, it's at this point, it's kind of a high level, more of an information, providing them with information.
So it sounds like it's very proactive on the part of the committee. You're looking when applications come in and then you scan it, and you see opportunities, and then you
Yeah,
give
and this
feedback
is
without them soliciting feedback from you.
no, they've been soliciting feedback, and that's relatively new.
Okay, cool.
And so it's been kind of in response to that. It's something that we've been trying to do for a little while, and the operationalizing whether it was our place or not was difficult to kind of tease out. But very recently, they've been coming to us, and so we wanted to be able to take advantage of that opportunity. And Frederica is really the one who's leading that work.
That's great.
Oh, I can absolutely talk about town meeting. Town meeting reimagined. Okay, so we are at step 2. So the first kickoff meeting was kind of a big visionary. Let's tell the select board the things that are important to us that we want them to take into consideration as they build their budget. Meeting number 2 happens January. Thank you.
Thursday.
It's a Thursday evening. And then I think there's a snow day, just in case, but
The 27th.
that meeting will look almost identical to what you know as town meeting. The select board will have provided a line by line draft of the budget that we will at the high school auditorium, go through, ask the select board questions, offer amendments to line items. It's moderated by Dave. It looks, for all intents and purposes, exactly like a town meeting. The differences are, one, that there is a hybrid option so that folks can participate from their couch. The other is that the voting on amendments isn't binding. So the select board, we will, if someone stands up and says, I always pick on Phil, and I apologize for that, that I want this amount of money set aside for fog lines. And you take a vote, that vote will still happen. Those votes will be tallied and recorded. The select board can, at their discretion, not include that line item in their final budget. What we will do is put together a report of all of the amendments that were proposed, the results of the votes, and that will get published next to the final budget in the town report, so that folks can look and see, oh, Phil's thing didn't make it in there. Do I want to vote down because of that? Maybe. So that at that point, the town meeting has happened. Hopefully people who want to participate are better able to participate because they've got a hybrid option. The results of that meeting and the discussion from that meeting will be synthesized in a report that's in the town report booklet that has the final budget that everyone will review before the final stage of town meeting, which is going and casting your ballot to support or not support the town budget on the first Tuesday in March.
Is the planning commission gonna weigh in on town budget in any capacity?
I'm so glad you asked that.
I'm so glad for the opportunity.
Yes, okay, so I'm the liaison to the select board, so I have been in conversations with Catherine about that, knowing about that date of the 23rd, knowing that we're very interested to have input on the budget and knowing where we are this year compared to where I think we're gonna be in 2025. Because Jim has inspired me, as you know, and I'm taking that, in stages. So anyway, so I've talked to her a few times about it and said that we wanted to weigh in on the budget, and they weren't ready yet. They didn't have anything, drafted. I didn't really want to start from scratch for us exactly because we're in the throes of our zoning work. I did present at that meeting and presented a framework for how the town plan and the actions in the town plan should inform the budget. And I said that a subset of the planning commission would probably be pretty motivated and interested to work with the select board on the budget. So the last conversation with her, she was going to be working out with Paula what the schedule was for when, and I was focused mostly on the capital budget, when those pieces would be available for us to start working on, and it should be like now, she said like right after Thanksgiving. So I'll follow up with her. They have a meeting on Thursday, but I'll follow up with her before that and find out. I'm thinking of, yeah, I don't know, I think some of it will have to be offline. And then our January planning commission meetings, we potentially discuss it in our meetings, if we want to have a formal recommendation. And we have at least until January 23rd, but then they don't finalize the budget until whatever after that.
I think it would be great. If nothing else, just to set a precedent, if we had some kind of formal recommendation.
Right.
To have a seat at the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's what I'm gunning for. So I'll probably be back at you for the time and the
Okay.
effort soon.
Awesome.
Okay. Be careful what you wish for.
Well, I'm ready.
Right, okay, good. Any other liaison updates? Oh, Sabina, did we tell them about the demo project on Raceway?
No.
Okay, so the bike ped committee is looking at next summer having a potential like demonstration, temporary, short-term pedestrian section or like a separated area somehow on Raceway from the Jericho Senior Apartments to Route 15 and improving the way Raceway lands at Route 15 at the crosswalk for pedestrians. Working with local motion, very early stages on that, but that they're also getting some momentum and progress with their new members, new chair, new direction, new charter. That's kind of one of the first things they're sinking their teeth into. Okay. All right, any other business, new items? You had your hand up. So do you have an other business topic? Okay,
Promise not to talk about 5.6.
okay.
I had to promise him Jim too, but he broke it. The select board is really waffling on wastewater. You know, when we spoke with them about, you really have to put in a serious number in terms of a reserve fund this year. Catherine talked about a number as low as $10,000. If you read the job description for the public works director, there's really almost a dismissive reference to wastewater. There's a bunch of stuff we're going to do. And then wastewater is sort of a potential something or other, you know, as opposed to, it doesn't shout in the job. It's not clear in the job description, you know, that we're serious about this. The town has to deliberate, get back to the engineer. And the engineer, at the last meeting, they talked about what the boundaries would be for what would be served in terms of Riverside. Select board hasn't gotten back to the engineer at all on that. And I think the budget is an opportunity, and you have a deliverable planning commission on both separate deliverables for wastewater and water in the town plan for the end of this year. And I think you ought to, maybe you can punt by that. You can punt on that a little bit by saying, what we really need is a $200,000 commitment for a reserve fund for wastewater, just to demonstrate we're serious. It's an opportunity for the select board to say out loud they intend to do this and to have, and it forces them to put themselves in a leadership position. If they can't get a $200,000 reserve fund passed in March, this thing is not happening. Because then they couldn't sell any, if they can't sell that, they're not going to sell, a wastewater system. And so I think it's just time, and, I would encourage you to take a look at that, the job description for the public works person, because it's not serious about wastewater. That's for darn sure. And I think, in terms of the budget, absolutely. And one of the things I would encourage you to do is you have a deliverable for this year. And obviously you're not going to get it done, is to really give a serious consideration to water. And we really need to have water up at Jericho Center. And that will do as much to support additional housing in Jericho Center as wastewater. And it will, improve, the safety, considerably. So I think those are your two budget things. One is to get a $200,000 reserve fund or more for wastewater on Riverside. And some money to do, to begin on, water for, for Jericho Center.
Thank you, Jim.
Going to budgeting, liaisons, and planning commission futuristic purpose. When you look at the wastewater studies, and what Chuck just said, these are infrastructure studies. What is needed to meet the needs of the community? Jericho Center, as you recall, now has wells within the pollution zones of all the septic systems. The precious ancient community of 200 years has no fire protection other than from my property, where you have to drive up to our pond and connect to our hydrant in order to fight the fires. These things are really, really critically important. And the fire chief, we had all those meetings, but this stuff is not coming forward. And now is the time to say to Jericho, we've squandered $380,000 on a lead-infested, mediocre lot with standing water on the surface, and it sat there for 2 years. That's $500,000 of our resources that could have been employed. We're spending $4.5 million to build a garage in a conservation zone adjacent to the largest single pollution center in the whole town. That's the failure of integration, failure to participate in budgeting, and, for example, cut their losses, sell the property for the assessed value of 160, get rid of it, take that money, put it into the budget, and make it active. Because I suggested to the select board that they take the free public works easement that they have called the town road and run the septic down and get easements from other people on Lee River Road. Nobody acted on it, probably because I said it. But those of us who actually do this stuff, we don't need to spend $250,000 or $500,000 on studies that go nowhere. The firing range said to the town of Jericho, we will participate in your wastewater project. They have the municipal water that will save Jericho Center. They'll pay at least 50 to 60% of the cost of developing the capacity. The wastewater study actually had a $12 million thing. If you get $7 million from the feds, recycling our own money, it's very green. It conserves the environment because they don't spend it on bombs. So just think about how we can really do some significant things if you cull the kernels out of all of these studies, all these committees that you participated in. And Mary Alice Rivers, 28 years ago, gave that property to the fire department because she didn't trust the town with good cause. They're going forward with a subdivision of the property that could actually be the host for the wastewater solution. And my cattle were on that property 28 years ago when Mary Alice gave it to the town. So guys, we have a multi-million-dollar asset sitting over there, not being employed. We have $380,000 plus interest at 10%. That's almost $500,000 now, doing nothing. So you're the planning commission, you're our futuristic people, you're our leaders. Look critically at what hasn't been done correctly. Implementation of the housing, and I think it should not be affordable housing, it should be housing. Because there's a lot of solutions that are colored because as soon as people think afford. But do something really significant. You guys need to shake it up.
Okay, thank you. All right, anybody else have any other business? Chris? Okay, so wrap up and planning for December. The correct date of our next meeting is December 17th. Oh, right there. I was like, what is she pointing to? Does Heidi have her hand up? Okay, December 17th, we will come back to you with the red line, hopefully, for a change to density. And I made a bunch of notes on a few things, so I have some other ideas for that meeting, and then we'll know, after our meeting with David tomorrow, we'll also know if we will
Have a timeline.
be in a position to pick up on
Is
the
that the public hearing
bylaw
for
grant.
the town garage as well?
Yes. Yeah, the next
For
meeting,
us.
yeah, we'll have the public hearing on the town garage proposed amendment.
Yes,
On the 7th.
Yes.
And the next step with the MG is getting something back from Dave. What is the next step?
We're meeting tomorrow with David to define that,
Okay,
and we'll report back on that at the 17th.
yeah, but no, we're not, I mean, he hasn't really received like a consolidated package from us on all the feedback that we have assembled.
okay.
So he'll be working with that. And that's what we're gonna find out from him, is like how long he's gonna need and what else he needs from us,
Okay.
what format he needs that in. Okay, anything else? We can be done early. Everybody feel good about that? Thankful? Grateful?
Yes,
Okay, motion to adjourn.
motion to adjourn.
Chris, second.
I'll
He's
second
second.
it.
SJ's making our first motion. Okay, SJ seconds. All those in favor of adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone say nay? Okay, great. Thank you,
Heidi, feel
everybody.
bad.
Good night.
Thank you. Hope to be there in person next time.
Okay, thank you, Heidi.
Bye-bye.